everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today, I'm speaking with Daniel Schwalbe, CISO and Head of Investigations at DomainTools. Daniel, thanks for joining me today. Would you start by sharing a bit about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing security for whatever that means for probably 25 years now, which is a scary thought. Got my start in the late 90s. I've actually have some shared origin stories. We all used to work for like a little ISP and trying to build it up. And then it just one thing led to another. I'm originally from Germany. My accent will certainly betray that. But I've lived here for, 28 years now in the States. So definitely consider this my home now. Came here originally for university and, eventually graduated. And then one thing just led to another, right place, right time. Started in security when it was kind of originally forming as a more solid field. Mm-hmm. When sysadmins that were doing security things became more like, hey, you're a security engineer now. And
titles changed, nothing else did.
Yep.
Cool. So tell me about a couple key life events that shaped your leadership style.
Well, one of the things I did early on after moving here and getting my green card is I joined the U.S. Army. I kind of felt like I wanted to give back a little bit. So I did some active duty and then the rest of the time in the National Guard Reserves. And I learned a lot there. Early 20s, you're like, you think you know it all. And some force structure and discipline definitely was imparted by the Army way. And it also taught me a lot about like leading people very close to the edge. And, you make mistakes, people might die. That puts it kind of in reality. And I still draw, the other thing that the Army's pretty good at is that you don't get promoted until you like do the time in the classes. Mm-hmm. So once I moved from regular enlisted to non-commissioned officer, I had to go through training in classes and pass tests and all that kind of stuff. And that is something that is still to this day, 20 some years later, I still draw on. And it's the right mixture between empathy with your people, because you got to motivate them. Just yelling at them doesn't do it, but also like not being, a sucker and be like, every sob story you hear to get out of, KP or whatever, that doesn't scale either. So it's definitely one of those things that I look back on fondly and have never regretted doing.
So any specific stories of what shaped that style after the Army?
Well, so I started out as a frontline security engineer in the trenches, working for a large research university with, 500,000 devices on a network and 100 gig connection into commodity internet. Before that was very common. So in terms of learning, that was certainly a very interesting playground, and we saw it all and had to deal with it. And so early on, when I was an individual contributor, I would get frustrated with things. And also, I kind of thought I knew it all back then. It's kind of a bad habit, but eventually I got broken of that. And there, I think, trying to relate to my coworkers and getting better organized was something that then, as I progressed through my Army career, which goes kind of parallel then, I did change my approach. And again, not just being stubborn German bullheaded and trying to ram through my way, figuring out that actually being a little bit more on the compromise level and talking to people and be like, hey, wouldn't it be a better idea if we did such and such, rather than I can't believe we're not doing this and this is, bullshit. So that I think changed and I became a lead. So I was, not an HR manager, but I was sort of in charge of the team's day-to-day operation. Then I did become a manager and then eventually director and ran the SOC for a good amount of time. And so the natural evolution there, that's another thing I will say, government service gets a bad rap, and it certainly doesn't pay as well as private industry. But the one thing that in government, at least in my experience, was really critical is, again, if you get promoted into more and more senior leadership roles, you don't get to do that without training. I think as an industry, you have a bad habit of promoting people that are great individual contributors. They're like, oh, you've been here long enough. You're the manager now. Okay, that works for some people, but without actual guidance and a little bit of formal training, there's some horrible managers out there. And I think we've created that problem ourselves. And at least in my government experience, again, okay, you're up for promotion, go to this 2-week class and learn how to act as that level of leader and get some formal instruction. Of course, a lot of it is boring and whatever. But I think that is a key piece, and it makes for a better leader because there is some useful theory out there that teaches you how to, the right level of empathy with your employees, but also, again, there's still a mission to accomplish. And so I definitely draw on that even today. And I think as a manager, I would not be where I am today if I hadn't had that sort of formal education around it.
Now, is that something people outside the government could access somehow?
Yeah, not all of these were internal. Like we brought in external consultants that taught this class. So there's leadership forums and whatnot. Obviously there's a lot of probably snake oil out there, so your mileage may vary, but those are absolutely accessible. And I've talked to some other folks who are in larger corporate structures, especially older, as well established companies that have been around for a while, that have similar programs and bring people in. And I firmly believe that makes for better leaders.
Not a surprise. All right, so what non-technical skills have had the most impact?
I consider myself a jack of all trades and master of some. So I've always liked working with my hands. So obviously working on computers makes us all, the day job and pays the bills, but I love building things. I love working on old cars. I've got an 88 Ford F-250 with a 8-cylinder diesel in it. Freaking engine compartment is big enough you could live in there. So I love working on that thing rather than a 2018 or whatever hybrid where you open up the hood and it's all plastic. It's don't touch this. So
serviceable parts. Yeah.
So doing a lot of construction on the house as well early on before we had kids, and just understanding how things work from the ground up, and not just accepting oh yeah, this is a thing that works, but I don't understand how it works. That bothers me. I like to figure out how things work. And I think that applied to the day job gives you a better perspective, because we sometimes have a tendency to get lost in the sort of minutia of just this is the problem, we're going to fix it. Well, don't worry about these other things here. Well, those other things have a tendency to come and to bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of has helped me see the bigger picture, step back for a second and be hey, what is it actually that we're trying to do here?
Yeah, definitely don't want to make changes that impact the ecosystem in ways you're not expecting. And it's bad.
Yeah, you and I know a little something about that from our time that we worked together.
Yeah. We might. So speaking of, can you think of a mistake that led you to significant growth?
Well, actually, that's early on. I mean, it's not to say that I haven't made mistakes later on in my career, but one that I often, especially when I talk to university students that want advice on what am I going to go with my career and what should I do, et cetera. One thing that I learned early on when I was a computer support specialist, whatever, IT support at a department before I switched over to security. And we were upgrading a fleet of 400 workstations from NT4 to Windows 2000, back in those days. And basically, for some of them, we would swap out straight up the full tower back then, and just transfer data off. But some individuals had nicer machines that wanted to keep them, so we had to do in-place upgrades, and we had a process. And I was rushed, and at one point I blew away some professors 10 years worth of research, unrecoverable, on the drive. Tried forensics after, but it was just poof, gone. And that was terrible. And I had a split-second decision to make. Do I try to sweep this under the rug or blame somebody else? And I essentially decided, no, this is going to be bad and I might get fired over it, but at least I'll own it and admit to it. And ultimately, I mean, he wasn't happy, that's for sure, but ultimately appreciated the fact that I wasn't going to, try to explain it away or blame somebody else. And that's something I think, especially junior people, they're so worried that, a mistake is going to cost them their job or something. But that actually then goes to integrity. And can I even trust this person ever again? So if they own up to the mistake and then learn from it, and definitely don't do it again. You get one mulligan most times, and then become better as a result of this. Another sort of small example, I was a router jockey for a while, and we had to do system upgrades on a hospital network at the window was 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. or something, and I overslept and didn't hear my alarm, and I had a voicemail from the senior engineer what the hell, man, where are you? And I could have made up some excuse, but I was hey, man, I own this. I'm very sorry. I overslept. It's not an excuse. And that bought me a lot of credibility with that guy. And that later on certainly was reflected. He's like, well, okay, we all make mistakes, just don't do it again. Where other people might have been like, oh, the dog ate my alarm clock or whatever. It's not worth it. Like, we all make mistakes, but how you deal with them, how you own them, and how you then evolve and try to control to not make them again, I think it makes a big difference.
Well, I think especially in this sector where, personal integrity and people trusting that you're saying and doing the right thing is important here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in our industry, we often know where all the bodies are buried and technically have access to all the systems and could do horrible things, but you have to trust those individuals because they're necessary and they need the access when something bad happens to be able to do investigations and whatnot. But if you can't trust them that they're not going to read the CEO's email or something, that's bad news.
Yeah, not off to a good start. So did either of those jobs fire you?
They did not. So lesson learned, but also probably got a little lucky.
There's a little bit of luck, but I can think of a couple times in our teams where we had similar scenarios where it's like, all right, I'm probably losing my job for this. It's like, oh, don't do it again. We understand. We've all been there.
Yeah, if you try to cover it up, you're much more likely going to get fired because it will come out eventually.
Absolutely. So is there any one individual who directly altered your career?
Yeah, I would say my boss on my last sort of tour of duty at the university, shout out to Kurt Bailey. He's not going to watch this as a Luddite, but and he would take that as a badge of honor. But he was the CISO at the university, started shortly after I started in security operations, which at that point was different departments for political reasons. But I really appreciated his approach to things as a non-technical person, but having a very deep understanding of the risk and the interconnectedness of all of the stuff. You don't necessarily have to understand how a file system works, but you understand that it's storing critical data and it needs to be protected much more so than something, of the front desk computer of like a check-in station or something. And so just learning from him, he had come up through the banking industry and like checks and controls and batch processing and et cetera, which I thought always was like a good basis for, especially in a large public institution. And, him and I did certainly butt heads over times and had disagreements, but we were always able to work it out. And yeah, I credit a lot of my professional growth and also like broadening my horizon and maybe not being as, single-minded, this is the problem and I'm going to track this down. And if it's the last thing that I do, but taking a step back again and be like, okay, that's a problem, but there's also this and this. So how can we make some adjustments in the whole thing in order to, affect change at the larger level? And he was a master at that. The other thing that he really taught me was professional networking. That was like his number one thing. He knows everybody and so many people. And I took a page of that book. And I think this is, one of the reasons you and I met is through professional networking. I looked it up. The earliest documented proof I could find of the two of us interacting was the ISO I-11 in 2012. We may have met before that, but I know for a fact we did have years.
That's the oldest I can remember. But
yeah. And in our industry specifically, I think the professional networking is so critical because it's a globally distributed work problem. And the more people you know, and the more people you can, when
things hit the fan,
you can pick up the phone and call them, or now maybe send them a signal message or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. I'll answer that. That is so critical. And I think some of the more junior people coming into the industry kind of are missing the point on that and aren't willing to do the work because they just feel like, oh, everything, I followed that guy on LinkedIn. That's good enough. No.
You're not going to get past the front desk because of a LinkedIn follow. You've got to have something behind that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a handful of those scenarios where, you remember that time we had dinner in insert country name here? Actually turned into necessary conversations. So, all right, security incidents, operational failures, they happen. They're part of life. That's why we're here. Any valuable lessons you've pulled from one of those?
Well, never let a good incident go to waste. That is my takeaway there.
Yeah.
Like, it sucks in the moment, and we've had some doozies. I think there's two parts to this. How, as an organization, you handle the response to that. There are so many bad examples. Again, companies are trying to like sweep things under the rug. Will be like, oh, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. And then 2 weeks later, there's another leak. And they're like, yes. I think everybody's going to get breached eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
Yep.
And accepting that, you can do some pre-planning and you have obviously, ideally have an incident response plan, et cetera. But in the moment, how you handle it still matters. And, let's look at CrowdStrike. They had a huge oops and cost billions of dollars in the global economy, but they owned it. They were very transparent about how the after action and the sort of root cause analysis. And I didn't cancel them. I'm a customer. And I said, you know what? They're not going to do this again. So I thought they handled it very well, where there's some other companies, which I'm not going to name, who did it horribly, and it caused me to divest from them or never want to do business with them. So I think that's one thing, how you handle it, have a plan and do the best you can and try not to hide things, because it will always come out and it will always make you look bad. On the other hand, internally, once you've made it through something like that, do your own root cause analysis, of course, and identify the weak points and be like, you know what? This is something we've been calling out as a security team for a while, and now it happened. Can we maybe now get the funding to actually remedy this? Yeah, I mean, don't forget about that part, because especially if you do a good job, as much as possible on the remediation of the incident, you need to improve, because then otherwise we'll be right back. And ideally, the powers that be will see that and be like, oh, yeah, you've been saying it for 2 years, but we didn't think it was that big of a deal. Well, now it is. Okay, hopefully here's some money.
It is, and it was, and
yeah.
Let's fix it now. Triggering thoughts back to my networking days of a sign I had over my desk that read "Better Design Through Catastrophic Recovery." There were more than one incidents that were not intentionally caused that ended up being a maintenance window anyway, because you're already down and it's not going to be back for an hour. This is a good time to move some cable. But I think the same applies in security.
For sure.
So what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job today?
I really enjoy the security community aspect. I mean, I would say there's a finite number of people around the world that do what we do. And I'm not talking about junior SOC analysts, they got to do their time in the trenches. But then once they ascend a little bit into, more managerial or more senior roles, I would venture there's probably globally less than 5,000 of us. Just throwing a number at the wall there. And once you've been at this long enough, you won't know all 5,000 of them, but by the Kevin Bacon game, you probably have a connection to every single one of them. And I really love that aspect. And now a new responsibility that I took on 6-7 months ago in my job, and this is the head of investigations part of it, is the DomainTools investigations, the research arm of threat research, where we publish information for the community. It's not branded. It doesn't say use our tools to do these things. No, I'm not about that. Yeah. We find interesting things, and it happens to revolve around DNS because that's what we're expert in. But putting it out there for the community to consume, and also hosting events at various conferences to try to get people together, I really enjoy that. I enjoy going to conferences, even though it takes us all around the world, and there's some impact on family with all that travel. But I think it is absolutely key and critical. I think during COVID, we lost a lot of this because we couldn't travel, or people weren't as willing to travel. And that set us back. And we're just now, I think, slowly catching up to making up for that lost time. Some of our communities fell apart during it because when they didn't meet for a couple of years, and now it's so much harder to get started again.
Bootstrap all over again. Yeah.
Yep. And new things are coming up, and that's cool. But I think employers in general, unless the senior leaders are steeped in this community, sometimes have a hard time understanding, well, why do you need to go to this conference in Japan? That costs a lot of money. Well, it's the only place I can meet these people. And again, meeting in person is beneficial, because when bad things happen, they might take my call, or similar, I will take their call.
Yep.
So the in-person, and it just can't be just once a year, because that's not frequently enough. And also not everybody goes to every conference, so you have to have coverage. Yep. And that's super critical. And that's something that I really enjoy. I enjoy presenting at conferences, but even just attending and seeing cool talks and talking to people and strengthening that professional network is so critical. And I would implore any larger company employer, if you're giving your security people a hard time over that, think about what you're actually getting from that. Yes, it's going to cost some money, but it's going to pay it off tenfold in the long run.
Absolutely. Looking back, can you think of a defining moment that solidified your passion for security or cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it was probably in my government days. It was a couple of things. One was sort of in the classified space, where we caught an attempt, like a very highly sophisticated phishing attempt that was crafted specifically for that one person who had access to particular things. And, we caught it, which was great, not always a given. And then, sort of working backwards, like the malware in that thing had been compiled like 35 minutes prior to it being sent. And we're like, oh wow, this is serious. Like they're after this for sure.
Yeah.
And that sort of renewed my national security is important to me. And in that aspect, that felt pretty good and told me that what we're doing is the right thing and it's important. And then another incident where, we had to notify, some 5,000 people that their EINs, their employee identification numbers, which for sole proprietors are their social security numbers, were impacted, and along with some other information. And there's a lot of small vendors that provide services to the university, and they were actively harmed. And we saw like exploitation of that information, tax return fraud because of the social and additional information. And so as much as possible, working with them and then also getting the U.S. Attorney's Office involved and being able to make those connections and at least walk those individuals through, okay, this is what happened. It was terrible. This is what you can do and help them. And at scale, which was a huge effort, and we had to bring in temporary people, et cetera, give them scripts, train them all. But that really was another sort of eye-opening thing, like, oh, you can actually make a difference. Maybe not at a global scale as a single individual or a small team, but when you cause something bad to happen, how you handle it and the aftermath and taking care of these individuals as much as it was possible and, assure them, hey, yes, this happened. No, it's not going to happen again. And here are some steps you can take and maybe going a little over, the extra mile there to especially take care of these, small businesses. As a small business owner myself, that was important to me. And it made a big difference. And again, sort of reaffirmed to me that what we're doing is important and useful.
Nice. Any major life events, births, deaths, etc., that have altered your approach?
Having kids, certainly that's a life-changing event, and it kind of gives you perspective on the future. I'm almost 50, not quite, but, it's middle age is solidly here, so I'm not going to live forever. But, the kids are, teenagers now, and so they have, a good amount of time ahead of them. And in today's environment with, social media and everybody's got a tiny computer in their pocket and there's so much that goes on, it made me realize that I can't take the approach that maybe our parents took. They're like, oh, this newfangled thing, like a computer with a modem. What? Nah, not mine. Like the internet. How does it work? But even as I'm sure you can relate as professionals in the field, the newest TikTok trend or whatever terrible things that they're doing on their phones isn't necessarily native to me.
Yep.
And so I've made it a point to actually, to a degree, learn more about these things and like get some of these terrible apps on my phone because I need to understand how they work.
Ouch.
I know it's terrible, and then also talking to the kids, having an open conversation, be like, okay, eyes wide open. You want this app? Have you read the privacy policy? Have you read the terms of use? Do you know what they can do with your data? And we've had one small win, like my son really wanted a particular app. Actually, now I forget which one it is, and I was like, okay, you know the drill. And I would have him read it, and of course, I look for the keywords, so there'll be a little quiz, so he can't just quite fib it. And he came back, and he's like, actually, never mind. I don't want this app. No, what I just read, no. So, small parenting win. But I think as parents of teenagers, it's easy to just be like, oh, kids are going to be kids. No. When we were growing up, there was no such thing, and we were out from sun up to sundown in the summer and do whatever, and it was basically fine. Nowadays, with having their stuff in their faces 24/7, the other thing, like drama at school, that ended at school. You might have had a phone call after school and be like, oh, that person, blah, blah, blah. But then somebody like, get off the phone. And then it ends. Mm-hmm. Now they bring it home and it just continues 24/7. And that I'm really concerned about that. And so being more involved in that and staying up to speed, certainly as a parent, has changed my approach there.
So let's switch gears a little bit, talk about kind of your team and how things fit together there. So how has your approach to building trust in a team evolved?
In security, I feel more so than in some other, IT/tech related teams, personal trust is critical because we all have access to all of this information and we know things where bodies are buried and where bad things are happening, where all our risk is, etc. You can't have somebody go on social media and oh, the thing that we found today, etc. So when we were still in person in an office, I instituted a rule: when the doors are closed in the office suite, you can say almost anything you want. And if there is a frustrating entity you're dealing with, be like, fine, vent in this closed space, but nothing leaves that area. You need to have that outlet, but don't take it home and talk to your spouse about some frustrating thing when you're investigating a particular breach or something, because not that you can't trust your spouse, but it eventually will leak out and that will be a very bad look. We had dirt on every single department, but we wouldn't talk about it outside of it. But to say you can't talk about it at all, I think is too much pressure and people will burst in some way or another. And so fostering sort of the trust element in a closed space is one thing, making it okay, but making it very clear the second the door opens and somebody who doesn't work here walks in or there, that's got to stop. Yep. I've always appreciated classified workspaces that had the flashing lights on the ceiling, unclean. It's okay, lights are going off. Somebody's here that's not part of the team. Stop talking about everything. They wouldn't quite approve it, but it's always something that I've wanted. And then in a remote setting, that becomes even trickier because you're not in a physical space. Yep. And we all, lots of us work from home, literally. If I walk out the door over there, the rest of the family at some point or another is there. So the trust is also something that has to be earned. You can't, some people get more naturally to it, but you can't really bring somebody in you don't know I completely trusted, here's all the keys to the kingdom and hope you do the right thing. That doesn't work. I also find that especially with my direct reports, etc., trying as much as it's appropriate to form a personal connection. I make it my business of, if they volunteer the information, their spouse's name, their kid's name, I'm not gonna dig it up on the dark web. But if they're oh yeah, Johnny's playing soccer for United or whatever, I make a point of noting that and then later on following up, and that kind of builds the trust. And what happens at home will affect us. And I'm hey, I know you're going through some tough time, take some time off. It is okay. Yeah. Don't feel like you have to be here. And that builds trust, and it goes both ways. So when something bad happens, you can be okay, cone of silence. I'm going to share some information with you all. This is what's happening. No, we can't talk about it to anybody. And when you've established that level of trust and have made the effort, I think it becomes more than just a paycheck. And I think that's more critical in security because of the access and the knowledge than most other departments.
I'd agree. What's your strategy for balancing the need for technical experience and expertise with leadership skills?
I like to have a conversation with each of my employees, sort of certainly first when they join. So what are your aspirations? Where do you want to go? If I hear somebody is yeah, I'd like to, eventually be in management. I'd like to lead a team or something. That certainly gets taken into consideration. But there's also people who know they want to be an individual contributor and they never, ever want to manage people. Yeah. That's equally important because, as I mentioned earlier, we have a tendency of shoehorning people that don't really want it or don't necessarily have the skills. And so I try really hard to listen and not even put people who have no interest in that on that potential trajectory. You can be a principal engineer. You can be a very senior person and, pay-wise, et cetera, do just fine. You don't have to lead people because if it's not in your blood, and if it's not something you want, you're not going to do a good job at it, and then everybody suffers. And so I also look for moments when, again, it's all hands on deck. The natural leaders will kind of reveal themselves and kind of, to a degree, want to take charge. And if I feel like that's appropriate, then I'm absolutely letting them. Hey, okay, you're in charge of this task now. Go run with it. Let me know what you want. Do it. And I think that's also sort of confidence building and will sort of solidify a person's path. Yeah, they've shown good tendency. I think they can do it. Let's further develop that. Similarly, I think the sort of lead role is a nice trial, at least in our world. As a lead, you can sort of control people's workload and what are you supposed to work on, but it's not an HR function. You're not the HR manager. You don't have the reviews or, approve time off or anything. Yeah. That's a good way to kind of test the waters of, is this actually something you like doing? And I've had one example where we're like, let's try it out. And it turned out the person didn't like it and it made them uncomfortable. And I'm like, cool, now we know. Let's not worry about that part. Individual contributor role is the best path here. So I think a lot of managers, maybe not a lot, I shouldn't generalize, but some managers probably don't want to take the time if they have 20 direct reports. That's insane, but it's not really possible to do that. Luckily, in smaller companies, the teams are not infinitely large. And so there's a little bit more, but you got to make the effort. And I'm a firm believer that as a manager, part of your role is to make that effort to be able to identify those natural leaders and promote them if they so want.
Nice. As a CISO, you spend a lot of time dealing with fire in various forms coming from various directions. So how do you manage keeping up on emerging threats while keeping the fires down to a minimum?
Yes, that's actually turns out to be quite tricky. I mean, I read, like, my morning starts basically by seeing what happened overnight, but also reading various social media posts on the latest trends of things like that. But something that I realized a few years ago is that there are individual contributors on my team who that's like their natural, like they stay very close in touch with that stuff and be like, hey, I like that you're doing this. Can you flag the real bad stuff for me, especially if they're in a different time zone and maybe wake up before me? I really like having in my, Slack or whatever. That's sort of stuff you should pay attention to.
Get your own daily.
And I encourage that. Yeah. But basically, not as formal as a briefing. Once I get to a bigger company where that's possible, absolutely. I would love to come in the morning and be like, here's a briefing. I'm like, all right, cool. But you don't have to do it all yourself. If you have people who have a natural propensity to that, who are good at it, encourage them and reward them from it. Like, hey, this is part of your job now. This is great. Please give me that information. And if I miss something, don't feel like, oh no, I can't say that because he's going to feel one way or another about it. And I'm like, no, I encourage it. Bring me the stuff that I need to be. We have a stand-up every morning. That's kind of left over from the Farsight days, which I really always enjoyed. And so in my small team, I have a daily stand-up that most days I try to make. And I always ask, hey, what am I missing? What needs my attention? Because I am spread pretty thin with doing all the things. And my team's very good and be like, this is the two things you need to pay attention to today. And I'll usually do it. So fostering the culture that it's okay to tell your boss, hey, you haven't done this. Can you please get to this? Or this is a new thing that we just learned that needs your eyeballs. Or be like, hey, there's a new thing. We kind of got it. We'll let you know what comes of it. You don't actually have to worry about it. Takes a while to establish a team that can function like that, but that would be my solution to that. You got to do some of your own work, but if you have people who are good at it, absolutely leverage that.
But how do you build that effective team culture?
Yeah, especially in a remote setting. I mean, we're a fully remote company, which after working 20-some years in an office, I wasn't so sure how the switch was going to happen, but Farsight actually made that really easy because there was this very strong remote culture. I think some other places, it's more like a kind of a hybrid approach where people still wish they were in the office. But yeah, so for my team, I take a lot of the lessons that we learned somewhat the hard way, but also for good reasons at Farsight, and be like, okay, I understand not everybody has a good day every day and doesn't necessarily want to be on camera, but if you dragged your butt into the office, I would see you. It's not like you're, wear a paper bag or something. So if we have a team meeting, I strongly encourage everybody to be on camera because the nonverbal aspect, you can see somebody's not 100% or is distracted or something. And don't punish that, but acknowledge it and be like, hey, everything cool? Do you need to, take some time or whatever? So in that way, making the team feel cohesive, having regular team meetings where everybody's expected to show up and don't make them 2 hours long. Nobody wants that. But just to check in, hey, everybody's here, still alive. We're doing our things. Got any questions, etc. It takes extra effort in the remote setting, but it's critical, I think. And that way also in the team itself, allowing people to speak their mind, as long as they're mainly respectful, but I encourage criticism. If I'm doing something that they don't think is a good idea or something, I want to hear about it. You can tell me one-on-one, but if you feel like you need to say it in front of the whole team, then that is not a bad thing because that tells everybody else, oh, I can actually bring forward things that might, need improvement or something, and the boss isn't going to bite my head off in front of everybody. I don't believe in that. If we have a problem, I might have a one-on-one conversation, but I'll never do it in front of the team because that's totally wrong. And also what I've told my team early on, like, if you're empowered to do something and you make a decision, I will publicly back you till the end of days.
Yeah.
Like, we might have a conversation one-on-one and be like, okay, could that maybe have been handled better? Or was that really the right call? But I'm not going to publicly question a decision that is otherwise sound that one of my team members makes in front of the larger company or to another department, because that nothing destroys trust faster than like basically throwing somebody under the bus like that. And so all of these little things kind of factor in and I think help build team culture. It takes an effort. You have to be actively doing it and remind yourself to do it. And sometimes it's you forget. It's not that easy. But I think that's critical to building a good remote team and building the team culture that encourages collaboration and trust.
Any other tips for building that kind of culture in a remote environment?
I am a firm believer that periodic in-person meetings are an equally important part of remote work environment. Now, as we hire people around the world, that gets more difficult. Travel, all that kind of stuff. But that should not be a reason not to do it. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you can meet multiple times a year in person. And to be fair, there are some people who seek out remote work because they don't want that.
Yep.
They're great engineers, they're great whatever, but they're like, I don't want to leave my house. I'll be on video calls all day long, that's fine, but don't make me travel to, Seattle or, Vegas or something. And that has to be okay as well. I mean, if there's an expectation that the job requires that, then select for that at the interview process. But if you tell somebody this is a 100% remote job, travel is not required, then don't ding them for not wanting to show up in person at the all hands or whatever. So, but the in-person interaction in a remote environment should not be underestimated because you can only get so much connection over a video screen. But when you meet somebody in person, you have a beverage with them and you maybe hang out for a bit and, get them to know them in real life, as the kids say, IRL, I think is critical. And I do think there's a lot of companies who basically, no, we're remote. We're not doing any of this. I think that's a mistake.
I'd agree. Any thoughts on how to screen for good candidates in a remote environment, especially with security and trust in mind?
I mean, one popular new question is asking them, how fat Kim Jong-un is. Not my idea. I read an article on it, but the impersonation scam of trying to infiltrate organizations through remote workers is a thing, and controlling for that isn't easy. We've had situations where, a person interviewed and then it turns out there's actually 3 people trying to do the job, time sharing, like terrible things like that. There's technical ways you can figure that out, but ideally, don't have that in the first place. But, the adversaries have figured out, A, it's a good way to make money. And also gaining the access at a certain level at a company that they might be after is absolutely a thing. And that's becoming more tricky, especially with, global hiring. I'm a huge proponent of a global workforce, especially if you have to follow the sun, et cetera. But it gets harder and cultural differences are a thing. And so I think the interview process has to be somewhat rigorous. Putting out a job advertisement 99% of the time will get an onslaught of like AI generated applications or whatever. It's really hard. So I think, especially in security, personal referrals still go a long way. And especially a more senior role, you might be like, ask your network, be like, hey, we're looking for this kind of thing. Everybody has a lead. There are people out of jobs and there's good candidates out there. But I think if you just kind of post something publicly and hope something walks through the door, that's ever more in the security, community, and especially at the more senior roles, that's more and more of a losing proposition. Doesn't mean you can't find good people, but it's just so much harder because of all of the AI slop and stuff that's around. So leveraging your network, and in some companies, there's this sort of propensity like, well, you can't just hire who you know. I'm like, I actually disagree with that. If I've worked with this person before and I know they're good and I can hire them and can make it work, absolutely. Why would I not want to do that? Because I know something about them, they're a good performer, and they're the right person for that job, makes it a lot easier. I think at Farsight, we hired, a couple of people that just walked in through the front door and they turned out great, but a lot of them were referrals because when you're a small company and you're running fast, you don't have time to like really vet somebody at that level and then get them up to speed. So for somebody you've already worked with before, it's much more efficient. Now, at scale, much harder to do, but the remote vetting, if money wasn't an object, I would probably fly people in for in-person interviews, even for a remote job. The other thing that I find in that sort of vein is that people who have never worked in an office, like they're in their like mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s, and have never had that in-office experience, that's a different ballgame. It's not to say that they're not great workers, but I think for those of us who spent many years in a physical office interacting with people, the switch to remote was a little bit easier. Some people that just don't like it, and they're very happy about this return to office call for some of the large companies. But I also find that somebody who's never worked in an office, their messaging is, the way they write emails, the way they do Slack is quite a bit different, because they never really had to face the person on the other side in the lunchroom or at the cafeteria or something. Like, oh, you just sent a snarky message to me on Slack. Now I see you in person. Might have some words. And when you're just basically hiding behind a camera, people tend to be a little bit more catty at times. And that's, culturally, that's hard to control for.
That's good. I can definitely remember a handful of rather impressive referrals we got. We had some interesting, during the Farsight days, some interesting referral traffic that made for some interesting team members. So talk to me a little bit about your take on AI in this rapidly moving cyber landscape.
It will come to no surprise to you that I would say I'm an AI skeptic. I have made peace with the fact that it's probably here to stay. I was kind of hoping it'd be like a blockchain thing where everybody's hyped about it for a year or so, and then they're like,
there's still time for some of that. I don't think it's going away completely, but I think it may go the way of Bitcoin, but we'll see.
We'll see, yeah. I do think there are useful applications for it, but in these sort of, land grab, early gold rush stages, there's so much terrible stuff out there. And I also think people, like the general populace, already had a problem discerning, sources of information properly, and this is not helping. And like it's mind-boggling, even like in 2025, when all of these models have been added for a while, you ask it a question, it tells you to put glue on pizza. Like, are you for real? Now, in our industry, I think the technology itself is actually useful. We have big data problems, and some of the aspects of AI is pretty good at identifying things. Now, it's not going to replace your SOC. It's not going to replace your analyst. Right. Might it make them more efficient? Might it make them be able to focus on the needle in the haystack a little bit more? If done properly, I am not opposed to that. Now, as a CISO and working for a company that has vast amounts of data and intellectual property, my biggest fear is basically somebody accidentally, uploading or connecting our proprietary data source into a public model. And once it's there, it's never coming back. And that could be a huge, could be a company-ending event. Mm-hmm. And so what we struggle a little bit internally, and we had to write a policy, and everybody's trying to do the right thing. I'm not saying people are wantonly ignoring things, but they all try to be more efficient. And so, we picked, I'm not going to name which one of them, but we picked one of the things as the sort of approved standard. And so, ask it questions. I find it's great to I got to write a job description. Hey, so-and-so, write me a job description. Here are the criteria. Now, can I use that and post it? No, absolutely not. But is it a good starter so I'm not staring at the blank page? For sure. Absolutely. I talked to one of our colleagues in the field who agrees with me that public models are, to be definitely treated with, some skepticism. But if you can bring the technology in-house and feed your data into a model internally, there's some interesting things you can do that just previously at scale were very hard to do. This technology enables it, for sure. Oh, yeah. But I think there's also a big difference of what is colloquially and publicly thought of as AI, which is Gen AI, versus the technology and large language models that can be used for pretty impressive things. So still skeptical, probably warming up a little bit at a time, but it'll be interesting to see. And I'm just waiting for the big, massive breach caused by AI. And hopefully I'll be like, I tried to tell you, but yeah. We'll see.
And we wait. So if you could hop in a time machine and go back 20 years and find yourself, what advice would you give you?
Don't be so damn intense. Still pretty intense if you ask, and as ask friends and colleagues, but it's like orders of magnitudes less. I used to be like super hell-bent. Like if I thought I was right, I was going to stop at nothing and I want to prove that point. That didn't score me many points with, people and made things harder. Yep. And, in your early 20s, you think you know everything, and that's kind of a little bit of a rite of passage growing up. But I think if I could tell myself, hey, a little less intensity is probably good. And, in the scheme of things, it's all going to work out. I mean, I might tell myself, hey, when that Bitcoin thing comes around, go get a bunch.
Yeah.
And just make sure you secure them somewhere where, 10 years later you can get them.
Offline wallet, yeah. Don't lose it.
That might have been fun, but other than that, we are the sum of our experiences. And, I can't think of anything that was so drastically bad that it was detrimental going on. Yeah, there's certainly some things that I had to learn the lesson the hard way, maybe more than once, but that also kind of, forms who I am today. So I'm not necessarily sure I would want to do that over.
That's fair. What's your approach for mentoring the next generation?
That's a key point. And I don't know that as an industry we do enough about this. I periodically teach college classes here at the University of Washington. It's been a little bit, but it's certainly something that I've enjoyed doing and want to do more of. And there you get them kind of at their sweet spot because, typically juniors and seniors, so they've been there a little bit, they're interested, they want to hear. And so I'm still in touch with a number of previous students as they've progressed into their career, and I always open the door and be like, hey, you want to talk about something, you want to reach out, you have a question or something, I'm happy to talk to you. Mm-hmm. The more we can do that, the better. Another sort of key realization I had, I think you and I've actually talked about this, but I was at a Threat Intel conference last year in Berlin, and there was about 200 and some people in attendance, and I knew 2. And I was like, that's a weird feeling. And then I looked around, I'm like, oh shit, they're all in their early to mid 20s. I am the old fart now. When I used to start attending these kinds of things, and I'm sure you had similar experiences, we would be like, oh, the graybeards over there, we got to talk to them, but pay your respects and stuff like that. I'm, a little gray, not exactly graybeard, but there's people coming up to me like, so what was it like? And I'm like,
back in the before times.
I'm not that old. So I'm encouraged that there is a large enough up and coming people in that. But I think putting ourselves out there and opening the door to being like, hey, let's have a conversation. I'm happy to share some of my experience. If you have questions, etc., we need to take a more active role in this. And the remote environment, again, isn't that great for it. But at the same time, you can pop on a Zoom with somebody much more easily than meet them halfway across the country. So it goes both ways. I think the more we are at conferences and us engaging, us as those that have been around for a while, with younger people, don't be creepy about it, but offer it. Yeah. And they all talk amongst each other. Hey, it's like, hey, I had a great conversation with that guy. You should probably talk to him. That's something where we, I think, can make a difference. And it's on us to make the effort, because I think the next couple generations, that's less of their thing. We would reach out, in our 20s because we knew these are the people who knew, and okay, we'll talk to them. They might tell us to, go pound sand, but okay. But in the sort of, Instagram generation today, connecting on a human level is harder and people are less willing to do so. So I think if we want to make a difference, us as the, Gen Xers and, of that generation and later, doing a little bit more outreach, even though that's maybe out of our comfort zone, is important.
Nice. Any key advice that you give to young people in the space?
I would say remain curious, try to learn as much as possible, but also don't try to be an expert on everything, because then you will be an expert at nothing. A well-rounded background and understanding of the larger technology picture is important, but as you progress in your career, you'll naturally find a specialization, and that's not a bad thing. Because being an expert necessarily means it's a finite space of things. You can know so much about that and learn more and become better at it. But if you try to do it on everything, generalists are a thing and they're important as well. But there's not as much room/demand for those. And so, early on, like I would say early on, especially like, if more people that are coming up now have gone through the university system, they have some kind of degree or something. Not all of us of our generation have them, and we're just as good, if not better. So the college diploma, the degree doesn't make you a better at a job. What I've also seen is that because now there's like cybersecurity degrees, etc., people come out, have never done a day in their life in the trenches, and they're like, CISO title, please.
Never handled an incident, want the CISO title.
Yeah. So, realize that a theoretical education, and maybe you've done an internship or whatever, that's all great, but you're still going to have to learn a lot more on the job. So, being a little humble is never a bad thing. And then identifying areas of interest, and then if they're your passion, pursue them, because it will make you better at them rather than all the things when then you're just like, well, I can do a little bit of everything, but I'm not good at any of them.
All right. What resources and tools do you recommend to aspiring professionals?
There's a lot of good online stuff now that certainly has, sort of exploded over the last, let's say, 5 years or so. There's classes, some are free, some cost. I wouldn't necessarily recommend spending thousands of dollars on your first exposure to this kind of stuff. There's decent amount of free things out there. But the other thing is conferences. Like I would highly suggest, and a lot of them have like student rates, or like, if you're an early professional or something, you're not going to have to pay the full freight. Exposure to talks, especially at some of the more technical conferences, will give you like ideas and thinking about. And again, people who give presentations tend to be willing to have conversations afterwards. That also goes back to networking. You start making connections with people, and as long as you're polite and reasonably humble when you come in, I'm happy to talk to you. Most of our contemporaries would be happy to talk to you. And so that gives you a lot of exposure to how things are actually done. And, you might even eventually get a job out of it. And then you entering into an environment where there's a lot of smart people doing the work and learning from them, is a great way to grow. Theoretical knowledge is important, but in the scheme of things, the amount of like on-the-job learning and training that I've done in my career is invaluable and could never be replaced by any theoretical sitting in a classroom being taught things.
Any specific conferences you'd recommend?
Some of the better ones are difficult to get into. You kind of have to know somebody. But I would say like, for better or worse, DEF CON is accessible, and there's a lot of good talks, and there's a lot of people there, even if they're just, filtering in and out. So that's certainly a good one. Some of these smaller, cons tend to be open, like B-Sides is pretty good, at least the larger conferences. Besides San Francisco, I was at during RSA, and it was a really solid set of presentations and good community. It definitely fosters that. Besides Las Vegas, Canberra, if you're in that neck of the woods, is really great. And then some of the smaller cons that, anybody can attend, CyberWarCon, SleuthCon. I'll be at SleuthCon next week presenting, so shameless plug here. But I think those are good because they're not as overwhelmingly large. And you can still just go on their website and like apply it to attend, and it's not as difficult to enter. Like some of the conferences that you and I go to, you have to know somebody or be invited. You can't just walk in. You'll get there eventually. If you keep up networking and do the right thing and work with people, you'll get those invites eventually. But a lot of us are also present at the other ones. So that's a good sort of entry-level exposure that I would certainly encourage people to make an effort and show up and, maybe volunteer if you have the opportunity. That's another good way to, show that you're serious and you're willing to do stuff and not just like, a lurker.
Nice. What's the hardest transition you faced moving up the ladder?
I would say coming to the realization that I can no longer do all the things. Having come up through the trenches and being hands-on, and I consider myself a fairly technical person, and I like being hands-on. I still like doing investigations. Like, sometimes on a weekend, I'll get a phishing email, and it's like, hey, this isn't half bad. I mean, had me do a double take. I can see how people fall for this. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I have access to tools. Let's pull this apart. And then 4 hours later, like the family's like, where are you? What are you doing? It's Saturday. And I'm like, oh, hold on. I almost got them. So I enjoy doing that. But as I'm expanding my role and becoming more senior, there's just less time for that. I also in general, I like to at least understand what the role of every person on my team is. And, I used to have a thing where at least, one day a month, I'll do somebody's job just to keep my skills fresh and also understand what it is that they're doing and where are the pain points and how can we make that better. Mm-hmm. The more senior you get, the harder that gets. And also like, why is the CISO provisioning a laptop? That doesn't feel like well, yeah, but so it gets harder. And I think that's something I had to really come to terms with because, again, I consider myself technical and I like to do all the things. Mm-hmm. But being able to delegate, that's one thing. But actually not fully knowing what it is that somebody does and how they do it, that's hard for me. Mm-hmm. But as a scaling factor, I had to come to terms with that. And now that I'm doing a lot more public-facing stuff, I'm away more from the day-to-day operations, I have a great team that I trust. And so I'm not worried about it, but it's just maybe a personal ego thing of mine where I'm I want to know how to do all those things and I want to stay in touch with it. But I had to make the decision that my time is better spent in the other things and just let go of it. But that was hard, for sure.
That's a tough one. That's up there. So when you're hiring, what qualities are critical? And how do you screen for them?
That's a very good, but also very tricky question. I think team fit is important, but how to suss that out is also tricky, especially in a remote environment. Having a solid interview loop where it's not just the immediate coworkers that person is likely going to have. Yes, it's time consuming and it's a little expensive, but, it matters. And so I like to, if available, pick people from other teams to just kind of take the temperature. Do you think they're going to be a good fit in our company culture and in the environment? I think this is something that isn't done enough because people try to be efficient and get it done. I get that. But there's been occasions where somebody got hired because they were fast-tracked and then they lasted 3 months because the fit just wasn't there. And that's hard and that doesn't benefit anybody. I think talking about their experience of remote work, is this their first remote job? Were they until just now in a in-office environment? And we were online a little bit during COVID, but I haven't been in 4 years, and now I'm taking on this fully remote role. That's worth a conversation. Is that something that you can actually do day to day for the indefinite future? And just be really honest with people because. When I first made the jump from going to an office every day, to remote, I was concerned about that because I'm how am I going to deal with that? And I rented a physical office for a while. So I left the house and I went to a place to sit by myself, to be online with my colleagues. Now, first I had a really strong culture and that really made it nice. And we did meet in person, which was also super useful. But I can see people who are I talk on Zoom all the time to my family or whatever. That's not a problem. No, doing the work.
Quite doing a day job.
No. And, some people really feed on interactions with their coworkers, especially those that are more extroverted around us. And so sitting by yourself at a computer and having to do work and produce things, I think sometimes it's underestimated how difficult that is. And it's not for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so trying to select for that, ask their experience, and really kind of dig down, is this something that they're passionate about? Or is it because it's a job and I think I can do it? And that, I think, to me, is a little bit of a red flag. It doesn't mean that they can't be a great coworker and it won't work out, but it's certainly something I personally like to dig in on because I've seen it go horribly wrong. And then, if you have that one person who never has their camera on or doesn't say anything, and every time you Slack them, you get a one-word response to something, that's not a good team fit. And then ultimately, it's going to create issues within the team, and it can start rotting team cohesiveness, and that's something I'm very adamant about. That cannot happen because once you start having fractures in that, it's the beginning of the end.
Yeah, all right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Before we wrap it up, if people want to follow along with your work, where's the best place to go?
So dti.domaintools.com is our site where we publish research, ideally several times a month. I am at Dan on Security on all the various socials. Not to be mistaken with Dan in Security. I'm pretty sure the Dan and Yogurt people are probably mad I have that handle, but it's mine. And then I've started posting on LinkedIn more. I've kind of taken a page out of your book. You preceded me on that. So you can typically find find me posting there, at least a couple times a week. Also, new research we typically announce on there just because it's a good medium to push things out. But yeah, find me, add me, DM me. I'm typically pretty open and happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Wonderful chat as always. And look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, this was great. Really appreciate the invite and had a great time. Thank you.